Welcome. If you have been participating in this webinar, then you know that we've been discussing equitable grading practices, the importance of alignment, the power of formative assessment, how it's different from summative assessment, and how we might make use of all of those things in order to pursue more equitable grading practices with students. One of the greatest challenges inside of the world of grading in education is the conundrum of averages. The challenge of using an average inside of any learning experience is that it tends to treat first attempts at learning and early attempts at learning the same as recent attempts at learning. Averages also sort of dilute students' most recent performance, which might be better because they've had ample practice. If you think about what it looks like to master a sport, what it looks like to master a hobby like cooking, you'll know then that in the beginning, our first attempts are often very weak. But by the end of a learning experience, when we've had lots of opportunity to practice and get better at something, those more recent attempts demonstrate that we're meeting those outcomes that are so important to doing quality work. Why would we punish a learner for being a beginner by averaging in their first attempts with their most recent attempts? When we use mode rather than average, we make a far more equitable assessment of student progress. For example, if my course outcome is that learners will identify and define languages, dialects, and varieties, and I have 3 separate module outcomes that break down into smaller goals for students, and then within that single module, I actually taught 7 mini lessons that were smaller. It's very possible to study how learners are progressing toward that course and module level outcome set, one small target at a time. Learners might have been invited in my first lesson to identify languages. Over the course of time, they might have had other opportunities to do this, either on low stakes formative assessments that happen in class, or through projects or journal entries, or even in a discussion board. Over time, the student might have improved around that smaller target. The same is true for how they approach targets 2 through 7. Rather than it being a one and done learning experience that lived in just one lesson or one module, I'm owning the fact that students have to distribute that practice over the course of an entire semester, and that I'm giving them multiple opportunities to get better at it. When I use an integer scale of 4, 3, 2, and 1, much like you see here, I can document student progress toward those targets and outcomes lesson by lesson. And rather than averaging all of those numbers together, I can simply look at this collection of data and get a sense of which number is repeating most often. For this particular learner, the number 3 seems to be repeating most often. Each time I assessed these very discrete targets, I documented how students were doing. And at the end of the semester, comprehensively, this student has actually met my course outcome, identifying and defining languages, dialects, and varieties. I have far more discrete information about what that looked like, target by target, which targets they struggled with and when. And this information guided my instruction and helped me become a better teacher so that their likelihood of achieving that greater target was much higher over time. How do you convert that particular scale to letters and points? This slide aligns to our expectations here at Damon College. And when it comes time to report in a far more traditional way, you have the opportunity to do that right here. There are ways also to offer learners quicker and better feedback. I'll discuss that in the next segment of this webinar.